In 2021, Fnaf Security Breach was released, and just blew open the doors of the Fnaf lore in hilarious fashion. This sort of legacy sequel takes place in a future where the previously defunct brand of Fazbear Entertainment has suddenly returned bigger and brighter than ever. Now, instead of the cheap hole-in-the-wall locations that the franchise was previously known for, in Security Breach, Fazbear Entertainment has somehow become a mega corporation, building world-class mega arcades left and right, and filling them with tech that would make the writers of Star Trek blush. But the question remains, just who exactly is behind all of this? Just how were they able to do it? And perhaps most importantly of all, why is Fnaf setting this up to be such a big mystery? Simultaneously calling strong attention to the man at the top, yet doing their very best to avoid giving any details, or even so much as referring to the CEO directly. And for us, unfortunately, Fnaf, in rather typical fashion, just hasn't provided enough evidence at the moment to truly prove any suspect here. Really, all we can do is go character by character to see who best fits the mold that the narrative so far has shown us. And while doing this exact process myself, I stumbled upon a character that has been all but ignored by the community in the process so far. So I just wanted to give my crazy sounding, but surprisingly plausible opinion on just who the CEO of Fazbear is. So let's dive right in. Also, in this video, I'm gonna reference past videos of mine for my theories. So whenever I bring up one of these videos, please make sure to pause the video and bring it up in a new tab to watch later. Because trust me, in parts of this video, I'm gonna sound like a crazy fringe theorist without the context of those previous videos. So again, if anything I say here sounds a bit weird or far-fetched, it usually just means I explained it in one of the aforementioned videos. But anyways, in an earlier theory video of mine, I brought up the surprising evidence that Michael Afton may not only be alive in Security Breach, but also a high-ranking member of the new Fazbear Entertainment. And as crazy as it sounds, if the man is still alive during that game, then why wouldn't he be? I mean, think about it. If Fazbear was reviving the brand, then who better to bring on than not only the man who lived through it all, but also the sole living heir to the franchise? Again, sole living heir. Sorry, MatPat, but Mrs. Afton would be like 90 plus years old at this point. And MatPat says in the first part of his theory that William couldn't have been the one who started out Fredbear's because he would have been too old to be believable when the real meat of the franchise started. But then later in the theory, he goes and just gives the role of billionaire CEO and self-taught soul magic scientist to a 90-plus-year-old lady, who I mind you, was a 90-plus-year-old lady who totally killed herself after losing custody of her kids decades earlier. So... But anyways, half-conscious writing aside, as much as I see the evidence for Michael being alive and part of FazCorp, I really can't see him being the CEO like I've seen so many people nowadays suggest. And this is for the simple reason that, on the wall in what's most likely his private room in the Pizzaplex, there is the famous Security Breach wall code, which is a direct command to Gregory, telling him to destroy the Glamrock animatronics in the game. If Michael is the one behind the wall code and is the CEO of Fazbear, then why not just order the Glamrocks to be decommissioned himself? If he's in charge, then why would he send a literal 12-year-old to do it? Robotic or not? No, I think that if Michael is alive and working in the Pizzaplex, he's most likely to be a manager or a project lead for the Pizzaplex instead. Someone with the power to commission his own private area in the facility, but not someone with enough authority to change attractions in the place, which we directly see in the Tales story, The Storyteller. To change an attraction in the Pizzaplex requires a majority vote on the Fazbear Board of Execs. So, no. Sorry guys, I really don't believe in Mike CEO at this point. And speaking of the storyteller, it's a common misconception that the antagonist of the story, Mr. Burroughs, is actually the CEO of the new Fazbear Incorporated. Because in the books, while he does hold a lot of power in the company, he is pretty explicitly confirmed to be simply a chairman or a member of the board of directors, not the CEO. So, if the respective evidence for the three most popular candidates for the role of CEO just don't really add up, just who is the mystery CEO of Fazbear then? Well, it's gonna sound crazy, but I think I have at least the best narrative answer to this question so far.
Usually consider smooching
ruined daycare attendant.
Pretty mad.
Generally speaking, I don't think about how smoochable an animatronic
if this thing
is.
had holes,
You should start thinking about it, because he's getting very close.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
Yeah?
What?
What's up?
I think Sammy might be the CEO of Fazbear.
You've reached your limit on talking. Shut the fuck up.
Hear me out, everyone. In the Fnaf novel trilogy, Freddy's co-founder, Henry, actually has 2 kids, not just one. Charlie, who's the oldest, and her little brother Sammy. And in the novels, the story is really set in motion when Sammy is said to have been viciously murdered by William Afton, with the trauma over his death driving Henry to suicide, and effectively starting off William's evil journey as a serial killer. And in the books, Sammy also plays this big role as a sort of supernatural entity, with the soft-faced but traumatized Charlie having mysterious visions of him throughout the books. So then, in the books, Sammy is dead, so naturally, he's probably dead in the games too, right? However, in the booklore nuclear bomb that is the final novel in the series, The Fourth Closet, it was revealed that Sammy was never killed after all, but rather, just like in the games, it was Charlie. And after Henry killed himself in the books, Sammy just went off with his mother and lived a normal life. It really is a beautifully shocking plot twist, a crazy subversion where the purported driver behind much of the story had just moved on and lived a normal life off screen. And it also should be noted that Sammy is also the most major book character who simply does not have a confirmed game counterpart, as the book characters Henry, William, Charlie, Gabriel, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, and even Michael Brooks, who's the sort of kind and benevolent booken version of the vengeful spirit, all have direct game counterparts. So, why would Sammy be any different here? Henry is also never said to have only had one child in the games. We just kind of assume that he did because of the way he just kills himself at the end of FNAF 6. Because, well, that would really bite if he left a wife and kid behind, right? But the problem with that line of thinking is, this is exactly what the book version of Henry does. Because in the novels, Henry kills himself after Charlie's death, leaving a young Sammy fatherless. So, if book canon Henry was willing to leave his son fatherless, just why wouldn't game canon Henry do the same? Especially considering the fact that, by the time Henry dies in the game canon, poor little Sammy would have long been an adult. And in my last video, I also proposed the potential lore bombshell that game canon Henry isn't the kind or heroic man that we have all idolized him as, and that before his one final sacrifice in FNAF 6, he was quite the opposite, actually. So I think that only supports the previous idea of mine. And also, remember what I said earlier about Michael being the sole living heir to the franchise? Well, I lied. He shouldn't even have the rights to the Fazbear brand anyways. Because remember, his dad William was flat out booted from the company decades earlier. And just who was the last person to open up an official Freddy Fazbear's location? None other than Henry. So, if it is indeed Sammy at the top of this all, then that's why someone was not only able to acquire the rights, but also have the interest of rebuilding the long-dead franchise of Fazbear Entertainment. But all of that aside, if we're speaking solely from a narrative point of view, Sammy could be one heck of a new villain for the franchise. I mean, think about it. Imagine the story of a kid whose father forgot about him over the grief of his preferred child, Charlie, with Sammy having to grow up in the shadow of his grieving father, always third in his mind to his 2 favorite kids, his daughter and his business. Imagine if in the story that Henry had rubbed off on poor little Sammy in the worst way possible, and that all that Sammy had learned from his dad was how to step on other people on the ladder to success, with Sammy deciding to use his anger and neglect to not only just walk the way of his dad, no, but to take the extra step and do it better, with Sammy becoming a very successful businessman, growing industry-leading tech companies while his dad and the company that he had started just rotted alone in the dark. And that is the catalyst for the new era of FNAF. When Sammy found out that his father had died in a fire at his own crummy little restaurant, Sammy saw it as an opportunity to strike, using whatever legal leverage he had as the son of the former owner of Fazbear Entertainment, along with his exuberant amount of cash and influence, to reconstruct the company that his dad once owned. But unlike his dad, who always wanted to keep the franchise in a cheap and nostalgic past, Sammy was going to take the company to the future. But how exactly? Well, by doing the opposite of his father and dancing with the trauma that the franchise had endured, with Sammy knowing that the company was a national pariah at this point. But instead of trying to haphazardly cover it up as previous owners of the franchise had done, he decided to run full force with it, with Sammy commissioning a series of indie horror games to jump on the growing popularity of the franchise, becoming a trendy creepypasta / urban legends fodder, sowing the seeds with well-timed publicity stunts for the franchise, and at the perfect moment, bringing back the pizzerias themselves, but with a modern twist, not letting the nostalgia hold the franchise back like his father did, but instead using it as a spring pad forward. With all of this bringing us the Pizzaplex and Fazbear Entertainment that we all know today. Dang, that would be an amazing story, and one heck of a direction to take the franchise in the future, focusing on the unintended legacy and domino effects of the hurt that the characters of the past caused, instead of just pointlessly reviving them to pad out the future. So, by means of past experience with this franchise, I don't think this is the route modern FNAF will take. But hey, sometimes the only thing sweeter than being completely right about something is being dead wrong about it. Anyways, this is Shy Crow, signing off.